Hello everyone, my name is Dr. Matthew Werwood.
And my name is Dr. Cindy Burnett.
This is the Fueling Creativity in Education podcast.
On this podcast, we'll be talking about various creativity topics and how they relate to the field of education.
We'll be talking with scholars, educators, and resident experts about their work, challenges they face, and exploring new perspectives of creativity.
All with the goal to help fuel a more rich and informed discussion that provides teachers, administrators, and emerging scholars with the information they need to infuse creativity into teaching and learning.
So let's begin. Hello and welcome back to our third episode in our Winter 2025 Listen and Learn series. And as a reminder, these are super short episodes designed to support professional learning.
Our goal in this series is to provide a quote from a creativity researcher or educator that we interviewed on season 1 of the Fueling Creativity in Education podcast. We would like to play this quote and then provide you with some questions to use with your professional learning community as a point of discussion. Now, if you don't have a professional learning community, then you can come join ours at Curiosity to Connect.
And as a reminder, we are going to be doing our best to connect these conversations to our 10 actions for fueling creativity in education. And hopefully you'll see that with some of the conversation that we facilitate after the quote. So Cindy, this one is your clip.
This is a clip from Dr. Kulvarn Atwal, who we interviewed not just once, but twice, because the first interview we did with him was about the thinking school, and the second one was about the thinking teacher. So if you haven't heard Kulvarn's episodes, go and listen to them because they're fabulous. Now, Kulvarn is a head teacher, and he was a head teacher for 9 years at a school he attended as a child. And in 2018 and 19, he was the executive head teacher of 2 primary schools, both of which were graded outstanding in all areas by Ofsted. So clearly British. And so we're going to give you a little clip of Kulvarn, and I think you're really going to enjoy it.
I'll give you an example. I went into, there's currently head of 2 schools, and I've been in the second school for about 15 months, and the school had been told it's requiring improvement by Ofsted. Now, when I first went into the school, the culture was everybody has to do the same thing. Okay, because that's what they think consistency is. That is not consistency. Consistency is consistency of values, consistency of expectations, consistency of aspirations, not consistency we do the same thing, because that you're not going to get the outcomes for the children. There were 20 classes in the what we call Key Stage 2, which is like your grade 3 to 6. Every class had the children sitting in rows, in pairs, facing the front, and almost all of them were in silence. And after a while, I went through and I thought, these are environments which are stifling dialogue, stifling creativity. I asked the teacher, why have you got them in rows like this? He didn't know. And I said, but they can only talk to the person next to them. They can't talk to anybody else. And so rather than going in and saying, right, this has got to change, everyone's got to do this differently, I invited all 20 of those teachers on the Friday afternoon. I said, listen, guys, on Monday, you don't have to have your children in rows. If you want to have your children in rows and it's really working for you, do it. If you don't, you want to have them in tables or groups or horseshoe, whatever you want to do, you can do. How many of those 20 teachers still had those children sitting in rows? Not one.
Now, this quote really focuses in on the strategy that we have, which is ask questions. So when we talk about asking questions, we're not just referring to students asking more questions, but for teachers and administrators to ask questions and question assumptions. So when you see things in your school or your classroom environment, say, why? Why are we doing this? So one of the things I really liked about Kulvarn's episode was talking about values and expectations. So Matt, I'm really curious, what are some of the values that you hold as a creative educator in your classroom?
I think flexibility is one I've recognized and learned to, because the reason why I paused is that it's a case of there's different pieces here. You know, it's values within the learning experience. There's values that you hold within your practice as a teacher. And within those, I would say there's expectations that you have. So for example, I value freedom and the capacity to, I suppose, choose how I want to deliver a particular learning objective and instruct in the way that I feel comfortable instructing. I recognize that that's going to be different for different people, but that's a value that I have. But in terms of my practice, I would say that I express the value of flexibility. If something isn't working, I look to give myself the flexibility to change it, to mix it up, to recognize that when I'm trying something new, it isn't going to work. It might not work all the time. And that's something that I've consistently done. And I think for the most part, students have typically responded in a positive way, particularly when it's not working. They're okay. Let's mix it up. Let's change it. And I think in order for you to express that value as well, you need to be very receptive to that environment, feedback from the students, and other, formative methods of assessment.
I love that response, Matt. And I definitely see in our conversations that you value flexibility. And I think for those of you listening, it's important to have these conversations with the people that you work with within the school culture. I know most schools have their own set of values, and to really look at those values as well and say, are we doing this in the classroom? So for example, I was working with a school and one of their core values was individual excellence, which I love that phrase, individual excellence. And when you really look at the school and what's happening inside, are they trying to make each student really excel? So look at your core values as a school, and then look at what's happening in your classroom, and then look at what you value as an educator, and then look at your classroom and see where those values align or where they don't align. Now, my second question, Matt, is what are your expectations that you have of your students? What are some of the expectations you have?
I think a commitment to the learning experience. And I think so long as I feel that students are making a commitment to that and their professional growth and personal growth, then I don't think I have any other expectations than that. I think that's my only expectation that I realize that I have. And I'd go as far as saying it's become a value as well. I value an environment, a classroom environment, where there is a commitment to learning. And I know I'm kind of bouncing around, and I think, yes, you're right. You see the flexibility that I like to explore, but that is also part of having a conversation, right, with colleagues, is that we might bounce around a little bit. But I think it was really important that you referenced the fact that you can have values of a school, and then you can have values as yourself as an educator. And then, of course, you have values that you're hoping to be expressed within the curriculum and what you're hoping to see from students as well. And I think that's all part of this conversation. But going back to be very clear, commitment to learning. You do that, I'm fine.
And one of the things I love to do with my students in the beginning of the semester is create a contract to say, what are all the expectations that we have of this class together? And then have everyone sign it. So you can do this with younger students in elementary school, or you could do this with college students, but to really have a clear understanding of, the expectations of being in a classroom together and how you're going to work collaboratively together. So yes, having a commitment to learning and being on time and making sure you really listen to one another and really to be aware of other people's feelings and, all those sorts of things. So if you're interested in that, I actually have a YouTube video on this, Matt, that I'll link in the show notes on how to do a values and expectations contract with your students at the start of the year.
I love that as well. And I know sometimes, this is a little bit sometimes in higher education, but we quite often have participation grades, right? And we talk a lot about participation grades. I would say that talking about values, my participation grade expresses my values for my expectations. And I certainly agree that having a conversation about what the students expect from this class is also important, because you also get that chance to see where there might be some disconnect sometimes, because ultimately we can reduce tension, misunderstanding, potential feelings, negative feelings, if we can align our values a little bit, or at the very least, this is what the students value from this class. This is what I value from student participation. So I think the values contract sounds absolutely brilliant. And if you are familiar with participation grade, I definitely would get you to revisit your criteria for the participation grade a little bit, because that typically is where you can express your values there. Do you want to bring more creative and critical thinking into your school? Then look no further than our podcast sponsor, Curiosity to Create.
Curiosity to Create is a nonprofit organization dedicated to engaging professional development for school districts and empowering educators through online courses and personal coaching.
And if you're craving a community of creative educators who love new ideas, don't miss out Curiosity to Connect. Get access to monthly webinars, creative lesson plans, short online courses on things such as generative AI, and most importantly, a supportive community, all focused on fostering creativity in the classroom.
To learn more, check out curiositytocreate.org or check out the links in the show notes for this episode. So the final thing is, and this is just a general note, is just to spend some time as a group or community asking why, and generate a list of questions and set the premise that you're not going to judge each other's questions and that you're going to keep open to those questions, and just generate a big list of questions of why do we do this? Why do we have pajama day? Why does every day in December need to be a holiday day? Why don't we celebrate more of this or that? Why don't we give an award for this? Why, all those why questions, to really spend some time just asking those questions. Because again, this one comes back to the strategy of ask questions. So question your assumptions, even if they seem silly. Why do we have students use pencils instead of pens? Why do, it's sort of just fun to even play around. And it can be a little bit comical if you say, when things come up as educators, to laugh as well when you're generating these questions. And what is really important here is that you just stop and reflect. And if what is working is best for you and best for your students, is that going to be effective for your students? Why are we doing that? Right? Because I think so often we wake up in the morning. I don't know about you, Matt, but I hit autopilot. It's like I wake up, I stand up, I say, it's going to be a great day. I brush my teeth, I go out, I get my coffee. And, you hit autopilot and you just go through your day without really questioning why. So really think about those things that are happening inside your classroom where you can ask why.
I love that. And I do want to make a quick connection to your earlier questions. My participation grade changed because I said, why am I having a participation grade? I knew there was a connection to attendance, but we can't grade on attendance at the University of Connecticut. So I had to look at this and I had to say, why do I have participation? What's the value of participation? And that's how I came about with things like commitment to learning as expressed through. And then I look at how I'm going to observe that commitment of learning throughout the semester. And that came about from a why question. And likewise, at the moment, as I'm starting to revamp my curriculum, one of the courses I've now taught, I think for about 4 or 5 semesters, and I'm starting to say, why am I still doing journals? And that, by asking why am I still doing journals, I'm now on a journey. And believe it or not, I'm going to stick with journals, but the journals have now changed a little bit because my values have altered slightly with the consequence of things like generative AI. So I love that. Asking why of your environment, asking why of your curriculum, and asking why you believe or think in the way you do.
And I will also build on that participation idea, Matt. I was talking with the teacher and she said, participation looks different for different students, right? You have a really quiet student. They're not going to be very verbal in terms of sharing. They might be more reluctant to share. You have extroverts who are very willing to raise their hands and ask questions. So one of the things that this teacher does, shout out to Mrs. O'Keefe, who might be listening, is she asks the students at the start of the year, what does participation look like to you? And how will I know that you're participating? And what should I do if I think you are not participating? And I think what's really interesting about that is it gives students the agency to say, this is like when I'm participating, I'm watching you, I'm paying attention, I'm interacting with students when it's appropriate. When I'm not participating, I'm looking at my phone. It's like really being deliberate with students about participation and what it looks like, because it's not going to look the same for all students.
Absolutely, 100%. And certainly I will tell you a little pet peeve is people who value participation on putting your hands up and engaging in conversations in class. All right, so I think that wraps up our third Listen and Learn series for winter 2025. So our next week will be our final episode, and then we'll be getting into season 10 of the Fueling Creativity in Education podcast. As a reminder, we will be sharing these episodes on our website and making sure that you've got access to the questions and a link to the episode where we've got the clip from. My name is Dr. Matthew Werwood.
And my name is Dr. Cindy Burnett. This episode was produced by Matthew Werwood and Cindy Burnett. Our podcast sponsor is Curiosity to Create, and our editor is Sam Atkinson.